The rain hammered against the conference room windows of the 32nd floor, each drop exploding against the glass like bullets in a war I hadn't realized I was fighting. I sat across from Rachel Martinez, the CEO's wife, watching her perfectly manicured fingers tap an impatient rhythm against her $5,000 Hermes handbag. The sound was hypnotic, almost musical, if you could ignore the venom dripping from every word she had just spoken. She had just delivered the most devastating sentence I'd heard in my 15-year career, each syllable carefully crafted to cut as deeply as possible. Marcus, don't confuse hard work with belonging. This company has standards. Her cold smile never wavered as she continued, her voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that only comes from someone who has never faced real adversity. Maybe it's time you found somewhere more suitable for someone of your background. The words hung in the air between us like toxic smoke, filling the pristine conference room with an atmosphere so thick I could barely breathe. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, being lectured about belonging by someone whose only qualification for being in this building was sleeping next to the right person. Rachel Martinez had never written a single line of code, never solved a complex technical problem, never stayed up until dawn debugging a critical system failure that could cost the company millions in lost revenue. I stared at this woman who had never worked a single day at Davidson Industries, never pulled an all-nighter debugging code while surviving on nothing but energy drinks and determination, never missed a family dinner because of a critical deadline that could make or break a client relationship. Yet here she was, sitting in our boardroom like some kind of corporate royalty, questioning my belonging in a company I had literally helped build from the ground up with my own blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights. The irony was so thick I could taste it, bitter as the lukewarm coffee that had been sitting untouched beside my laptop for the past 3 hours, growing a thin film on its surface that mirrored the disgust I felt building in my chest. The conference room itself seemed to mock me as I processed her words. Every piece of furniture, every technological marvel, every carefully chosen decoration had been paid for with innovations that bore my fingerprints as much as David's. The smart glass that automatically adjusted its opacity based on sunlight levels? I had spent 6 months perfecting the algorithm that made it possible. The voice-activated presentation system that responded to natural language commands? That was my baby, born from countless nights of machine learning experimentation in my cramped apartment. Even the custom software running the building's environmental controls carried code I had written during our lean startup days, when every dollar saved meant another week we could keep the lights on. Before we dive deeper into the story, please subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real stories like this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support means everything to us as we share these authentic experiences. The meeting had started innocuously enough, just another routine check-in that I should have seen coming from a mile away. Rachel had called me in to discuss the upcoming quarterly presentation, claiming she wanted to align the company vision with what the board expected to hear. Her assistant had sent the meeting request with all the corporate formality of a genuine business discussion, complete with an agenda that looked perfectly reasonable on paper. I should have seen the red flags immediately, should have recognized the trap being set with military precision. This was the same woman who had convinced her husband to redecorate the executive floor with imported Italian marble, while the rest of us worked in cubicles with flickering fluorescent lights that gave everyone headaches by 3 in the afternoon. This was the same woman who threw lavish charity galas that cost more than our entire annual training budget, events where she could pose for society photographers, while the actual workers who generated the company's profits scraped by on modest salaries and minimal benefits. She had turned our quarterly company retreats from practical team-building exercises into excuse for her to showcase expensive catered meals and designer decorations, all while cutting employee benefits in the name of fiscal responsibility. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She could spend $15,000 on centerpieces for a single event, but implementing a better healthcare plan was somehow fiscally irresponsible. I had watched her gradually insert herself into company operations over the past 5 years, always under the guise of helping David manage his workload, or bringing a fresh perspective to our corporate culture. What she had really brought was a toxic combination of entitlement and ignorance, making decisions about people's careers and livelihoods without understanding the first thing about what we actually did or how we did it. She treated our company like her personal kingdom, where she could play queen while the actual workers served as her subjects. "Mrs. Martinez," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. "I think there might be some fundamental confusion about my role here." I opened my laptop with deliberate precision, navigating to a folder I hadn't accessed in years, one buried deep in my personal archives that contained documents most people in this building had forgotten even existed. You see, I didn't just join this company as some ambitious employee looking to climb the corporate ladder. I co-founded it. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face as I began clicking through documents she had clearly never seen, evidence that contradicted every carefully constructed narrative she had built about her husband's singular genius. Her mouth fell open slightly, revealing teeth so perfect they could only have been achieved through extensive cosmetic dentistry, another luxury paid for by profits generated through work she had never contributed to. These are the original incorporation papers from March 15, 2009. That's my signature right there, next to your husband's, witnessed and notarized by Patricia Goldman from Goldman & Associates law firm. I watched her lean forward despite herself, squinting at the screen as if she could somehow make the documents disappear through sheer force of will. The partnership agreement was written in the dry, precise language of legal contracts, but its meaning was crystal clear to anyone with basic reading comprehension skills. Equal partnership, shared equity, mutual decision-making authority on all major business matters. This wasn't some employee stock option plan or performance bonus arrangement. This was a founding partnership between two people who had started with nothing but ambition and complementary skills. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the continued drumming of rain against the glass and the almost inaudible hum of the building's HVAC system cycling through its programmed routine. I watched as Rachel's confident demeanor began to crack like cheap paint under pressure, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air in an environment it was never meant to survive. She had walked into this meeting expecting to intimidate a lowly employee into submission, probably rehearsing her dismissive comments in the mirror that morning while applying her makeup. Instead, she found herself face to face with someone who had as much legal claim to this building as her husband did. Someone whose name appeared on foundational documents that predated her involvement in David's life by several years. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Rachel had built her entire identity around being married to a successful entrepreneur, the brilliant visionary who had built a tech empire through sheer determination and individual genius. Society parties, charity events, and country club conversations all revolved around her husband's amazing success story, the rags to riches narrative that made for compelling cocktail party conversation. Now she was discovering that half of that story had been carefully edited out, that the foundation of her social status was built on a fundamental deception about the nature of David's achievements. That's impossible, she stammered, reaching for her phone with hands that trembled slightly, as if she could somehow Google away the truth I had just presented. The device was encased in a diamond-studded cover that probably cost more than most of our junior developers made in a month, another symbol of the lavish lifestyle that my innovations had helped fund. David never mentioned any partners. He built this company from nothing, starting with just his vision and determination. Her voice rose with each word, the veneer of sophisticated composure slipping away to reveal something desperate and ugly underneath, like discovering rot beneath a beautifully painted facade. You're probably just some early employee trying to make yourself sound more important than you actually are, inflating your role to gain leverage in salary negotiations. The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications about trust, honesty, and the fundamental nature of the relationship she had built with her husband. If I was telling the truth, and the documents clearly proved that I was, then David had been lying to her about something pretty significant for their entire marriage. Not just omitting details or downplaying my contributions, but actively creating a false narrative about how their current lifestyle had been achieved. That wasn't the kind of deception you could easily forgive or forget, and we both knew it. I could see her mind working furiously, trying to reconcile this new information with years of carefully constructed beliefs about her husband's singular genius. David had always been the star of every story, the brilliant innovator who could solve any problem through sheer intellectual force. Family dinners probably revolved around his latest triumph, his newest breakthrough, his amazing ability to stay ahead of industry trends. The possibility that half of those achievements belonged to someone else had probably never occurred to her, especially when that someone else was treated like a supporting player in the company's official narrative. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, a calm settling over me that I hadn't felt in months, like a weight being lifted from my shoulders after carrying it for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. For too long, I had allowed this woman and her husband to rewrite history, to diminish my contributions while they took credit for every success and innovation that had built their comfortable lifestyle. The quarterly reports praised David's visionary leadership, while conveniently forgetting that half of our most profitable innovations had come from late-night brainstorming sessions in my garage, fueled by cheap pizza and cheaper beer. The company newsletter featured glossy photos of David accepting industry awards that we had earned together, standing alone on stages where I should have been beside him, basking in recognition that belonged to both of us. Magazine profiles painted him as a solo genius, the brilliant mind behind revolutionary algorithms that had actually emerged from our collaborative problem-solving sessions. Even our company's origin story, as told on our website and in press releases, had been sanitized to minimize my role while maximizing David's individual contributions. But the most painful part wasn't the public recognition I had lost. It was watching our employees learn a false version of our company's history, seeing young engineers look up to David as an example of what individual brilliance could achieve when the real lesson should have been about the power of collaborative innovation and complementary skills working in harmony. "Rachel," I said, using her first name deliberately now, watching her wince at the familiarity. "Let me tell you a story about belonging, about what it really means to build something from nothing." I pulled up another folder, this one filled with photos from our early days. This is David and me in 2009, working out of my one-bedroom apartment in Queens because we couldn't afford office space. That's my kitchen table where we wrote our first business plan. That's my grandmother's quilt covering the server equipment because the air conditioning was broken and we couldn't afford to fix it. The photos told a story that Rachel had never heard, probably because David had never bothered to share it with her. There we were, two young engineers with nothing but ambition and complementary skills, splitting instant ramen and dreaming of changing the world. David was the smooth talker, the one who could charm investors and navigate corporate politics. I was the technical genius, the one who could turn abstract ideas into functioning code that actually solved real problems for real people. We started with $5,000 between us, I continued, scrolling through bank statements and loan applications. I mortgaged my mother's house to keep us afloat during our first year. While David was dating socialites and attending networking events, I was living on 2 hours of sleep and convenience store sandwiches, coding until my fingers bled. The old resentment was flowing freely now, years of suppressed frustration pouring out like water through a broken dam. Rachel's face had gone from pale to flushed, her carefully applied makeup starting to run slightly as perspiration beaded on her forehead. She was trapped in this room with me, unable to escape the truth she had tried so hard to avoid. "But David said he started the company alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. "He said he hired you later when things got successful." "David says a lot of things," I replied, clicking through more evidence. "Here's our original partnership agreement, signed and notarized. 50-50 split, equal equity, shared decision-making on all major business matters." I paused to let that sink in before continuing. "Here's the patent filing for our breakthrough algorithm, the one that made us our first million. Both our names are on it, because we developed it together during a 72-hour coding marathon in my living room." The rain began to intensify, creating a steady rhythm against the windows that seemed to match my heartbeat. I had never told this story to anyone at the company, had allowed David to craft whatever narrative suited his ego while I focused on the work itself. But sitting here, listening to this woman question my belonging in my own company, I realized that silence had been my biggest mistake. "You want to know about standards?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Let me tell you about the standards I've maintained for 15 years. I've never missed a deadline, never shipped buggy code, never compromised on quality even when the pressure was overwhelming. I've mentored dozens of junior developers, many of whom have gone on to lead successful careers at major tech companies. I've donated thousands of hours to local coding boot camps, helping kids from underprivileged backgrounds learn the skills they need to break into our industry." Rachel was fidgeting now, her designer handbag clutched so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She kept glancing toward the door as if calculating whether she could escape before I finished destroying her carefully constructed worldview. But I wasn't done yet. 15 years of accumulated frustration had found its voice, and I intended to use it. "I've seen this company through 3 major recessions, for office relocations, and countless technological paradigm shifts," I continued. "I've worked Christmas mornings and New Year's Eves, missed family reunions and birthday parties, sacrificed relationships and personal dreams to ensure our clients never experienced a single moment of downtime." My voice began to crack with emotion as memories flooded back, years of dedication that had gone unrecognized and unappreciated. "While you were planning your next vacation to the Hamptons, I was troubleshooting server crashes at 3 in the morning. While you were shopping for artwork to decorate the executive suite, I was in the trenches with our team, solving problems that kept food on their tables and roofs over their families' heads. The words were coming faster now, propelled by a righteous anger that had been building for years. Rachel finally found her voice again, though it trembled with uncertainty. "But David is the CEO," she said weakly, as if that title somehow negated everything I had just shown her. "He makes the decisions. He sets the direction. He's the face of the company." Her arguments sounded hollow even to her own ears, the desperate grasping of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling in real time. "You're absolutely right," I said, surprising her with my agreement. "David is the CEO. And you know what? He earned that position through his leadership skills, his vision, and his ability to inspire others. I've never disputed that." I closed my laptop and looked directly into her eyes. "But being CEO doesn't erase our history together. It doesn't give him the right to rewrite the past or diminish my contributions. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to question whether I belong in a company I helped create." The thunder outside was getting louder, as if the storm was building to its own climax alongside our conversation. I could see Rachel processing everything I had shared, her mind working furiously to reconcile this new information with the narrative she had built about her husband's success. The cognitive dissonance was written across her face in expressions that shifted from confusion to anger to something that might have been shame. "I need to call David," she said finally, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. "This doesn't make sense. There has to be an explanation." But even as she spoke the words, I could see the doubt creeping into her voice. Deep down, she was beginning to understand that her husband hadn't been entirely honest with her about the company's origins. "Call him," I said simply. "But before you do, let me share one more thing with you." I pulled up a final document, one that I had hoped never to use. This is a legal analysis I commissioned last year when David started making noises about restructuring the company leadership. According to our original partnership agreement, any major changes to the corporate structure require unanimous consent from all founding partners. Rachel's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the conference table with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet room. The rain had stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind an eerie silence that made our breathing sound unnaturally loud. She stared at the legal document on my screen, her mind clearly racing through the implications. "What does that mean?" she asked, though I could tell she already suspected the answer. Her voice was small now, all the earlier arrogance and condescension replaced by genuine fear. She was beginning to understand that I held more power in this company than she had ever imagined, power that her husband had apparently forgotten about over the years. "It means," I said carefully, "that despite what your husband might have told you, he can't simply push me out or diminish my role without my consent. It means that every major decision made over the past 5 years without consulting me has been legally questionable at best." I paused to let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "And it means that if I wanted to, I could challenge the legitimacy of his unilateral leadership decisions in court." The color drained from Rachel's face completely now, leaving her looking pale and fragile in the harsh conference room lighting. She was finally beginning to understand the precarious position her husband had put himself in by trying to erase his partner from the company's history. More importantly, she was realizing that her own attempts to intimidate and marginalize me had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of my actual position within the organization. "But I don't want to do that," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "Despite everything that's happened, despite the way I've been treated, I still believe in what we built together. I still want to see this company succeed, because it represents the best of what David and I accomplished when we worked as true partners." I could see confusion in her eyes, as if she couldn't understand why I wasn't immediately pressing my legal advantage. "The quarterly presentation is next week," I said, standing up and gathering my materials. "The board will be expecting to hear about our company's origins, our founding principles, and the vision that has guided us for 15 years. I think it's time they heard the complete story. Don't you?" The threat was implicit but clear. I could present the sanitized version of events that David preferred, or I could tell the truth about our partnership and everything that had followed. Rachel sat in stunned silence as I packed up my laptop, her mind clearly reeling from everything she had learned. The woman who had walked into this meeting with such confidence and superiority now looked small and uncertain, faced with a reality that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her husband's business empire. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it. "Marcus," she called out as I reached for the door handle, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond simple business considerations. She was asking about my intentions, my demands, my price for keeping quiet about what I could reveal to the board. I turned back to face her one final time, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since this conversation had begun. She wasn't evil, I realized, just sheltered and privileged to the point where she had lost touch with the reality of how most people lived and worked. Her earlier comments hadn't been born from malice but from ignorance, though that didn't make them any less hurtful or damaging. "I want recognition," I said simply. "I want the respect that comes from acknowledging what I've contributed to this company's success. I want to be treated as an equal partner rather than a disposable employee. And most importantly, I want the freedom to continue building something meaningful without constantly having to justify my presence in my own company." She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "And if David agrees to that?" she asked hesitantly, clearly hoping for some kind of assurance that this situation could be resolved without destroying everything they had built together, both personally and professionally. "Then we move forward as partners," I replied. "Real partners this time, with mutual respect and shared credit for our achievements. The company benefits, our employees benefit, and everyone wins." I paused at the threshold, looking back at her one more time. "But if he chooses to continue with the current arrangement, if he insists on maintaining the fiction that he built this company alone, then the board will hear everything next week." The drive home through the rain-soaked streets gave me time to process what had just happened. For 15 years, I had allowed myself to be marginalized and diminished, accepting crumbs of recognition while watching David bask in the glory of our shared accomplishments. I had convinced myself that the work itself was reward enough, that seeing our innovations improve people's lives was more important than getting credit for creating them. But Rachel's words had finally pushed me past my breaking point. Her suggestion that I didn't belong in my own company, that my background somehow made me unsuitable for the position I had earned through years of dedication and expertise, had awakened something in me that I hadn't even known was sleeping. The quiet acceptance that had defined my career was gone, replaced by a determination to reclaim my rightful place in the story of our success. The next few days passed in a strange limbo, with David avoiding me completely while Rachel presumably filled him in on our conversation. I could feel the tension building throughout the office, though most of our employees remained unaware of the drama unfolding at the executive level. They went about their daily tasks, writing code and solving problems, blissfully ignorant of the power struggle that could potentially reshape the entire company. I spent those days preparing for the quarterly presentation, crafting two different versions of our company's story. The first was the sanitized narrative that David preferred, focusing on his leadership and vision while barely mentioning my technical contributions. The second was the complete truth, documenting our partnership from the very beginning and highlighting the collaborative nature of our most significant achievements. The morning of the board meeting arrived with clear skies and bright sunshine, a stark contrast to the stormy weather that had accompanied my confrontation with Rachel. I arrived at the office early, wanting to ensure that all my presentation materials were properly prepared and tested. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was potentially about to blow up my own career in a boardroom that I had helped pay for with my own sacrifices and innovations. David was already in his office when I arrived, his door closed and his assistant fielding phone calls with unusually terse responses. I could see him through the glass partition, pacing back and forth while gesticulating wildly at someone on his phone. Rachel, presumably, though she could just as easily have been his lawyer or therapist at that point. The confident CEO who had spent years taking credit for our shared work now looked harried and desperate, finally confronting the consequences of his revisionist history. The board members began arriving around 9 o'clock, a collection of investors, industry veterans, and independent directors who had guided our company through its most challenging periods. I had presented to this group dozens of times over the years, always in a supporting role while David took center stage. They knew me as the technical expert, the problem solver who could be counted on to deliver accurate information and realistic timelines. But they had never heard my perspective on the company's strategic direction or long-term vision. "Marcus," called out Patricia Henderson, our lead independent director and a former executive at several major tech companies. "Good to see you again. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on our Q3 performance." Her warmth was genuine, and I realized that several board members had specifically requested that I present technical updates rather than leaving everything to David's more political approach. As we filed into the boardroom, I caught David's eye for the first time since my confrontation with Rachel. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes suggesting that he hadn't been sleeping well. There was something in his expression that might have been pleading, a silent request for me to stick to the script and preserve the status quo that had served him so well for so many years. But there was also resignation there, an acknowledgement that our relationship had fundamentally changed and couldn't simply be reset through wishful thinking. "Good morning, everyone," David began, his voice lacking its usual commanding presence. "As you know, this quarter has presented both challenges and opportunities as we continue to execute on our strategic vision." The words sounded hollow, rehearsed in a way that made several board members exchange glances. He was clearly struggling to maintain his composure while knowing that I could completely undermine his narrative at any moment. The first half of the presentation proceeded normally, with David walking through financial results and market position while I provided technical context for our product development initiatives. We fell into our familiar rhythm, the practice dance of CEO and CTO that we had performed countless times over the years. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that we could continue this way, that preserving the peace was worth more than asserting my rightful place in our company's history. But then David began talking about our founding vision and his role as the original architect of our technological approach, and I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest again. He was doing it again, right in front of me, rewriting history to serve his ego while diminishing my contributions to footnotes and supporting roles. The board members were nodding along, accepting his narrative without question because they had never heard an alternative version of events. "I'd like to add some historical context to David's comments," I said, standing up and moving to the presentation screen. Several board members looked surprised. This wasn't part of our usual routine, and they could sense the tension that had suddenly filled the room. David's face went pale as I connected my laptop to the projector, knowing that I was about to reveal information that could fundamentally change how everyone in this room viewed our company's origins. 15 years ago, David and I founded this company as equal partners. I began, clicking to display our original incorporation documents. We started with $5,000, a shared vision, and complementary skills that we believed could change our industry. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the projector and the scratch of pens as board members began taking notes. I walked them through our early days, sharing photos and documents that painted a complete picture of our collaborative partnership. I showed them the patents we had filed together, the breakthrough innovations we had developed through late-night coding sessions, the sacrifices we had both made to turn our startup dream into a thriving business. Most importantly, I showed them the legal documents that established our equal partnership, agreements that had apparently been forgotten or ignored as the company grew and David's ego expanded. The reaction was immediate and profound. Several board members began asking pointed questions about decision-making processes, equity distribution, and corporate governance issues that David had apparently been handling unilaterally for years. Patricia Henderson, in particular, seemed deeply concerned about the legal implications of major strategic decisions that should have required partner consensus but had been made by David alone. "This raises significant questions about our corporate structure and decision-making processes," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with similar situations before. "If Marcus is indeed a founding partner with legal rights that have been overlooked, we need to address the situation immediately and comprehensively." The other board members nodded in agreement, clearly recognizing that they were facing a potential governance crisis. David tried to regain control of the narrative, claiming that our partnership had evolved naturally as the company grew and that my role had shifted to better utilize my technical expertise. But his explanations sounded weak and defensive when contrasted with the clear evidence I had presented. The board members weren't stupid. They could see that something fundamental had been misrepresented, and they wanted answers. "Marcus," asked James Chen, one of our original investors, "how do you see your role in the company moving forward?" It was a loaded question, one that gave me the opportunity to either demand dramatic changes or propose a path toward reconciliation. David was staring at me intently, probably holding his breath while wondering whether I was about to demand his removal as CEO or propose some other radical restructuring. "I want to continue building this company as David's partner," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Real partners this time, with shared recognition for our contributions and collaborative decision-making on major strategic issues. I believe our complementary skills are still our greatest asset, but only if we acknowledge and leverage both of our strengths rather than pretending that one person built everything alone. The relief on David's face was visible, though I could also see him processing the implications of what I had proposed. Partnership meant giving up some of the unilateral control he had enjoyed for years, sharing credit and decision-making authority that he had grown accustomed to wielding alone. It meant acknowledging that his success had been built on a foundation that included my contributions, something his ego had apparently struggled to accept. Patricia Henderson called for a brief recess, giving the board members time to digest what they had learned and discuss their concerns privately. David and I found ourselves alone in the boardroom for the first time since Rachel's meeting, the tension between us palpable but somehow less hostile than before. The truth was finally out in the open, and there was something liberating about that even if the ultimate consequences remained uncertain. "Why didn't you just demand everything?" David asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. "You had enough evidence to destroy me completely, to take over the company if you wanted to." He seemed genuinely puzzled by my restraint, as if he couldn't understand why I hadn't immediately pressed every advantage I held. "Because destroying you wouldn't accomplish anything positive," I replied. "This company succeeds because of what we built together, not despite it. I don't want to run everything alone any more than I want to be marginalized and forgotten. I want us to be partners again, real partners who respect each other's contributions and work together toward shared goals." The board returned 20 minutes later with a unanimous decision. We would restructure our leadership to properly reflect the founding partnership, with both David and me sharing executive authority while maintaining our specialized roles. David would continue as CEO, responsible for strategic vision and external relationships, while I would be elevated to executive vice president and co-founder, with equal say in major decisions and proper recognition for my historical and ongoing contributions. More importantly, they mandated that our company communications, website, and public materials would be updated to accurately reflect our collaborative history and shared leadership. No more sanitized narratives that erased half of our founding story. From now on, the world would know that Davidson Industries had been built by two partners working together rather than one visionary working alone. The changes weren't immediate or easy. David had to swallow his pride and publicly acknowledge contributions that he had spent years minimizing or ignoring. Rachel had to adjust her social narrative about her husband's success, accepting that his achievements were part of a collaborative effort rather than individual genius. Our employees had to adapt to a new leadership structure that emphasized partnership and shared decision-making rather than top-down authority. But the results spoke for themselves. With both of our perspectives properly represented in strategic discussions, we began making better decisions that leveraged both technical innovation and market positioning. Employee morale improved as they saw their leadership team modeling collaborative behavior and shared recognition. Our clients responded positively to marketing materials that highlighted our deep technical expertise alongside our business acumen. Most importantly, I finally felt like I belonged in my own company again. The imposter syndrome that had been growing for years, that nagging feeling that maybe I really was just an employee who had forgotten his place, disappeared completely. I was once again a founding partner in a thriving business, with all the respect and recognition that position entailed. The quarterly presentation that had started as a potential corporate nuclear war ended up becoming the foundation for a stronger, more honest partnership than David and I had enjoyed in over a decade. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we spend years avoiding, and sometimes the greatest growth comes from finally confronting truths that everyone involved has been trying to ignore. As I reflect on that stormy afternoon when Rachel Martinez tried to put me in my place, I realized that she actually did me a tremendous favor. Her words were the catalyst I needed to finally stand up for myself and reclaim my rightful position in the company I had helped build from nothing. Sometimes, it takes someone questioning your belonging to remind you that you don't just belong, you helped create the very place where you're supposed to stand.